The important thing about this EIP is that we get measures put on the ground. We don't want advisors or farmers caught up in paperwork. So we've streamlined it back as much as we can. Now, look, when you're handing out €50 million, you have to have checks and balances and you have to have governance and everything right. But we've that cut back to the bare minimum that we can to make sure that it's not a burden on the advisor and it's not an admin burden on the farmer either.
As the harvest rumbles on, farmers are counting up tons but also keeping an eye on grain prices. Farmers should exploit all revenue generating opportunities, and especially an opportunity which can also help the environment. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. The tillage sector has an excellent greenhouse gas environmental credentials, but there are a few areas which we can improve on. Given the land type involved for crop production, the industry contributes to both nitrate and phosphate leaching. I'm delighted today to be joined by Noel Meehan, the Head of Agricultural Catchments Programme in Teagasc, and is also a key involvement in the Water EIP project. Noel joins the podcast today to talk about ways farmers can reduce the NNP leaching and also improve income. Noel, you might explain a little bit to me about what is the Water EIP and what it's set up to do.
I work with the ASSAP program, which is an advisory service for farmers in areas where water quality is impacted by agriculture. And we've been working on that for a number of years. And what we found when we went to farmers is that farmers were very willing and open to take on measures to improve water quality. But a big barrier to them actually doing things was the cost, because, we were asking farmers to do things that were above regulatory requirement and we had no financial support for them. So basically we're asking farmers to do things out of their own pockets. And to cut a long story short, we gathered some data from ASSAP and we fed it back up to the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, and made a case to say that farmers are there willing to take on measures, but we need to put in some sort of mechanism to support them. So that's where the Farming for Water EIP came about. What it is a number of measures that are designed to protect water from agricultural losses and at the same time compensate farmers for putting in measures. So I suppose that's where the Farming for Water EIP has come from, and it's a great initiative. It's it's the biggest EIP in the country. It is the only EIP of its kind in Europe, as far as I know. I stand corrected in that, but I think it is, and I think it's a great opportunity for farmers in areas where water is impacted by farming to avail of some funds to put in measures to protect water. So I think it's a great idea.
And Noel, within that, is it nationwide, or, as in targeting water bodies that are impacted? So if you had a water body in, I don't know, Donegal or Louth, or similarly in Wexford or Cork or Tipperary, for instance, is it across the country?
Yeah, look, it is nationwide, but within that, we are targeting water bodies that are impacted. So water bodies that are not meeting the targets that the Water Framework Directive has set for those. So the targets are good or high status for water across all rivers and all water bodies in Ireland. So we are really targeting water bodies that are not meeting good or high status. They're probably moderate or poor status is what we're looking at. And where ASSAP has done some work in. So, primarily where ASSAP has gone in and assessed farms, or going back to those farmers and saying, yeah, we have money here for you now. And then we have more of these areas coming on stream this year, next year, and the year after. And again, farmers in those areas will be eligible for it. So while it's it's open nationally, it's not an open call like acres where anybody can apply for it. It's quite the opposite. It's actually where we have work done where we visited farms and we're going back to those farmers and saying, listen, we now have money to support you putting in these measures. And also then as we move forward later on this year and next year and the year after, it'll be in new areas that come on stream. So the new priority areas for action that we're working in. So I suppose we will be contacting farmers as opposed to farmers applying on an open call to apply for the EIP. So in that way, it's very targeted, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that the money goes into a water body that's impacted. If we put the money that we have, which is 50 million, which is a lot of money, But at the same time, if we put that out across the whole country, the likelihood is that we won't see much improvement in water quality. But if we go into an area, into a water body that is impacted by agriculture, and we get 5, 10, 15, 20 farmers in that area to take on the measures that's required in that's impacting that river, well, then we should see an improvement in that river, and thus we have a water body that's gone from moderate to good, hopefully, and then we're seeing a water quality improvement. So it's very targeted to try and drive that improvement in the water quality at a localized area.
So just in that localized area, is there main areas within kind of the tillage catchment that are concerned, or that you're already working in, I suppose?
Yeah, look, I suppose the main issues with tillage land, or the impact from tillage is around nitrate leaching, and that's a very difficult one to deal with. As your listeners are aware, it's at a field scale, a farm scale, a parish scale. The scale is very big, and you have other agricultural activity also contributing to the nitrate loading in a catchment. But I suppose from a tillage farmer's point of view, we're looking at the nitrate loss primarily, and obviously, the main action or the main measure to deal with nitrate loss or nitrate leaching is to put in cover catch crops in the autumn period. Now, that's not to say that there isn't also some sediment. So sediment is soil, I suppose. So, if you have bare soil, or soil that's ploughed, or with very poor cover on it over the autumn or winter period, that soil is potentially available to be washed away. So that's not good for water quality. It's also not good for the farmer because he's losing his soil down a river. So by putting in measures there to retain soil in overland flow pathways, and where they deliver into the drainage network. So you have overland flow pathways that move, where water moves across the surface of the fields, and it enters maybe into a drain, which enters into a stream. So you're trying to target those areas with maybe riparian strips or riparian areas, or maybe.
But what does that look like, Noel? A riparian strip? What physically? What does that look like on the ground?
I don't know if some of your clients or your listeners are familiar with acres and the riparian strips. So you're looking at putting an area linearly alongside a drain or a river or a water body or something that can convey water of a certain width. And that width which when you let it vegetate up and grow with vegetation, that will trap the sediment, it'll trap some of the nutrients, and it'll be basically a physical barrier to stop what's leaving the field from getting into the drain, and just protection.
So essentially a good thick grassy margin with a bit of growth on it basically is the ideal scenario. And I suppose they're generally 3 or 4 meters wide, generally speaking, or would it be wider?
Yeah, you can go wider than that, and I suppose look at there's regulation there for at the minute for tillage farmers about how far back they have to keep back with these riparian areas. So look, they're probably familiar with that, the 3 meter and the 6 meter ones. But they're there for a reason. The reason is, as I've explained, is to offer that protection to the drain or the river, so that the sediment or the nutrient doesn't wash off over the field and into the river. So that's an overland flow pathway over the soil, over the field. We've all seen that, particularly with the rainfall that's been falling. Your listeners are very aware of what happened in springtime this year, and all the water that was moving, the difficulties that they had. So it's to try and target those areas in. So pick out where they interact with the drainage network and put these riparian areas in there. So you could have a linear one, or you could have a spatially targeted one. And really what that is a kind of like a shape, maybe circular or rectangular, that might jut out at the field a little bit. It mightn't suit the tram lines and whatnot, but they are very effective at protecting water quality, and that's the kind of thing that we're asking farmers to do.
So Noel, in terms of the measures we were talking about there, what sort of supports are available within that EIP project to support farmers in it?
So what we have is a number of different payment rates. So we have the linear riparian payment rate is the same as what's in acres at the minute. That's the rate that we went with. And while it's 0.38, it's 38 cents a meter for a 3 meter margin. In reality, that's when you do up the sums and do up the acreage, it's coming in around €1,200 a hectare of a payment for that area that you're taking out. So it's quite a generous payment when you look at it that way. We also have spatially targeted riparian buffer zones, which are those bespoke ones that we spoke about. And again, they're at a rate of between 400 and €800 for these, and these are quite small. They can be from 0.01 of a hectare up to 0.2 of a hectare, and we've €400, €600, and €800 payment rate for those at the minute. So they're again quite attractive, and they are just going to be fenced off and left in these kind of specific areas to protect water quality.
And what about the cover crops you mentioned earlier, Noel?
Yeah, look, I think that the main one that we'd be hoping farmers would take on is the cover and catch crops one. And I think the important thing to note here is that you can also, if you have this measure taken in acres, so you have €20 hectares of a limit in acres, you also have another 20 hectares that you can get through the EIP. So you can be in acres and you can also be in the EIP and get 20 hectares in both, so 40 hectares in total is what you can get. So I think that's an important point to make. The second point to make about the catch crops is the importance of getting these sown as early as possible and getting them in, because the earlier they're sown, the greater the growth rate, and the research has shown that the greater the area that they're in, the more nitrogen that they capture, which is important. So we've two rates at the minute for this. The first one is for the traditional typical cropping system, where you have your spring sown crop, you harvest it in July or August probably this year, and then you put in your catch crop and you leave it in situ till early spring, late winter, early spring, and that rate is at €229 a hectare per year. So it's higher than the acres rate. The second rate that we're offering at the minute is for our winter cropping system. So this is where the winter crop might be taken out typically in early July, mid-July, and then you put in your cover crop for August, September, maybe take it out in October, so as you can then go and put in your winter crop again. So that rate is at €173 a hectare. We have also a trial or a kind of a pilot measure that we're trialing with some farmers in the Castledockrell area and around Wexford. That's around getting a contractor to plant the cover catch crop. And I suppose the reason why we're offering this one as a pilot is just to see if there's a demand for it. And I suppose I'll explain maybe a little bit about what it is, Michael. Okay. We felt that a farmer is busy this time of the year, the harvest time of the year. They're looking to get their crop harvested. They're looking to get their straw baled, and the putting in of a cover catch crop is generally the last job on the list, and rightly so, because I suppose if you have 20 or 30 hectares of crop to sow and the weather's going to break, or a crop to harvest and the weather's going to break, well, you're obviously going to take that out as opposed to go putting in cover or catch crop. So the idea is that we would take that burden or that job off the farmer and pay a contractor directly to do that for the farmer. So we have a rate there of €253 a hectare for the farmer to hire a contractor to basically sow the cover catch crop. And I suppose the pilot point being is there demand for this? Is it going to work? Is it something the farmers are happy to do or not? And if it comes back in the positive that it is something that works, well, then we will incorporate it as a measure in the EIP going forward. If not, it was worth a try, and we'll see where it goes. But I suppose that the real reason behind this is to take that body of work off the farmer, and also to make sure that we get the crop established as early as possible, because the early establishment is real key in capturing nitrogen.
Okay. So, Noel, if farmers are listening to this, they might be interested in it. I think you mentioned earlier that don't contact us, we'll contact you. But if a farmer is quite interested in it, likes the sound of it, wants to know more about it, how does that farmer go about getting a bit more information?
Yeah, so look, I suppose the best thing to do is to go to your local Teagasc ASSAP advisor. So I suppose, in the southeast there, you have Neelis Noonan, you have Owen O'Brien, you have Fiona Doolan, you have Deirdre Glynn, and that's probably, that's covering the southeast there. And if you go over into Cork, it's Emer Connery and Claire Mooney in Tipperary. So if you go and talk to those advisors, they'll be able to give you a direction as to, what the story is. Are you ineligible, or are you suitable, or whatnot? And that's the first place to go to.
My understanding, Noel, if you correct me if I'm wrong, that if that a farm needs to be inspected by one of the advisors you mentioned earlier, and a kind of a plan drawn up, but relatively speaking, it's a relatively short. It doesn't go through the Department of Agriculture, if you like. It doesn't go online and that kind of stuff and be waiting for months. It's a quick approval kind of process, is it?
Yeah, and look, it's the important thing about this EIP is that we get measures put on the ground. We don't want advisors or farmers caught up in paperwork. So we've streamlined it back as much as we can. Now, look, when you're handing out 50 million euro, you have to have checks and balances, and you have to have governance and everything right. But we've that cut back to the bare minimum that we can to make sure that it's not a burden on the advisor, and it's not an admin burden on the farmer either. So the EIP application is a very straightforward process. What we do is we do up a plan for the farm. So a rainwater management plan is what we're calling it. Basically, that tracks where the water moves across your farm, in the yard and out in the fields. Where's the water moving, and then where that water intersects the drainage network. What measure is the most appropriate measure there? Is it a bund? Is it a riparian, linear riparian strip? Is it a sediment trap? What's the most appropriate measure? And then once we decide on that, we discuss with the farmer if they are happy to put that measure in, and if they are, if put in the application is sent in. The approval process will, we're constantly approving. It's not tranches or any of that kind of thing. It's literally they go in, and the EIP team assess the application. If there's, I suppose it's different to the department where, if you don't have everything right, your application could be rejected. Whereas I suppose we're anxious to get farmers in, so we'll work with the advisor, we'll work with the farmer to make sure the application works. If there's anything missing, we'll go back and request it to be submitted. And we, as I said, we really want to get farmers into this. So the application process is relatively quick. The turnaround time, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 weeks to turn it around. We do have some checks to do around dual funding. So where a farmer's in acres and they're looking for additional cover catch crops, we will be checking to make sure that the 20 hectares that you applied for in the EIP is not the same 20 hectares that you applied for in the acres. It has to be in two different, parcels, and obviously that they're clearly identified, that they're two different areas. And I think any reasonable person would accept that that's a natural requirement for that. So there will be a little bit of checks and things like that. But as I said, we're really, really anxious to get as many farmers as we can into the EIP, and we want to try and make it as easy as we can to get them in.
The final question, Noel, just on that, I suppose is around when farmers join acres, it's kind of a 5-year plan, and it's all kind of signed up, maybe 6 or 8 months or a year ahead, and they kind of have to follow that plan. Is there the same kind of requirement in what farmers sign up for the EIP, or is there flexibility from year to year?
Yeah, there is flexibility from year to year. Some of the measures are will be required to be kept in situ, but I suppose the cover and catch crop ones, you put an application in to do 20 hectares. We'll accept that application. We'll get the paperwork through and all the rest. And I suppose what we need then is proof that it went in 2024. And if you're going to do it in 2025, we need proof that it went in 2025 as well. So we will be asking for annual declarations that, if you applied for 20 hectares of cover and catch crop, well, then the farmer's going to have to submit in October, November 2024, whenever the job is done, that they put in the 20 hectares. Or if they only put in 15 hectares, that's fine too. We're not going to penalize anybody. It just means that you'll get paid on 15 and not the 20. And that would have to be done year on year. But, you know, for the rest of the measures that are put in situ, you just put them in and you leave them there for the 5 years and you know, hopefully for longer as well, particularly if they're benefiting water quality, you know.
No, that's brilliant. I suppose the real message is if a farmer is interested in this, you know, contact their local ASSAP advisor and they'll give more information on it and they can kind of take it from there. Noel, thanks very much for your time and look, we'll be chatting to you again.
You're very welcome, Michael. Thanks very much.
So that's it for the show this week, and my thanks to Noel for joining me on the show. So if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.